Welcome to another episode in season 7 Million Bikes, a Vietnam podcast. If you are listening to this or you are watching on YouTube, you will know by now we have passed 20,000 downloads. That actually puts us in the top 10% of podcasts worldwide. So thank you so much to everyone who supported, every guest, every listener, every single person. Lewis Wright, my wife Adrian Lopez, that's been involved. Lê Nguyen, we couldn't be here without you. So thank you so much. This is our second ever online live podcast, or Build Live podcast. Now, my guest today, she is a food marketer, writer, and industry speaker. She has a decade of working, living, and eating across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, and has managed more than 50 restaurants, which we're going to delve into deeper how someone who's so clearly young has managed more than 50 restaurants. I don't think I've eaten in 50 restaurants, but she's managed more than 50. Become a member of the 7 Million Bikes community and you'll get free tickets to our events, free 7 Million Bikes face masks, episodes a day early, behind-the-scenes content, and invites to special events for community members. The link is in the show description, so check it out and join today. Thank you so much to our existing community members. We look forward to seeing you again soon. This season, we've gifted sponsorship of a Vietnam podcast to two amazing charities close to our hearts, the Blue Dragon Children's Foundation in the north and Saigon Children's Charity in the south. Please check out the links in the description to learn more about these amazing organizations and donate if you can. Enjoy the episode and thanks for listening. Welcome to 7 Million Bikes, a Vietnam podcast, season 7. This is our second ever online live podcast, or Build Live podcast. Now, my guest today, she is a food marketer, writer, and industry speaker. She has a decade of working, living, and eating across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, and has managed more than 50 restaurants, which we're going to delve into deeper how someone who's so clearly young has managed more than 50 restaurants. I don't think I've eaten in 50 restaurants, but she's managed more than 50. Not only that, in 10 different countries in head of marketing roles. Today, she's the founder of Vietnam's only dedicated food and beverage industry blog called jovelchan.com and podcast. She's regularly featured in the media and speaks at industry conferences and workshops. And she's only been in Saigon a relatively short time. She's from Singapore originally, and she has made a massive impact immediately on the food and beverage industry. So if you don't know who it is already, my guest today is Jovel Chan. Thank you for joining us, Jovel.
Thank you for having me and this super solid introduction. I think you've introduced me better than I've ever spoken or introduced myself.
Well, you know, I'm a professional podcaster with more than 7 seasons and 20,000 downloads. So, you know,
I'll be sure to know that if I ever talk to you one day and have to introduce you.
So this is the difference as well with a live podcast. It's going to be, as we were just talking before you came on the call, for Annie and Pippa and Zion, they're all members of the 7 Million Bikes community, which means they get access to special bonus content. And so I was editing the next episode, which will come out next week, and I had all this bonus content. It made me laugh so much that I sent it to them immediately. So what will normally happen is I honestly will normally cut out about the first 20 minutes of every podcast because we talk so much nonsense, and then cut out a whole bunch of other stuff to try and make it an hour long, which is still really long. So I have to cut it down sometimes to 2 hours. The best thing about the live podcast is we can't cut out all this nonsense and stuff like that. So you guys get to listen to the unfiltered, unedited nonsense that we get to talk about. And we're having a beer. So who knows? But so Jovel, I've given you an introduction. So first question, 50 restaurants.
Yeah.
Explain.
I know. I feel like you asked me this over Messenger. You're like, there's no way you've done 50 restaurants. And I feel like, you know what, this is nobody has ever questioned this before, by the way. But it's really good that you pointed it out. So I spent a big amount of time in the Middle East, and my formative career years were there. And like I mentioned, I worked from one restaurant group to another restaurant group to another restaurant group, which went from 3 restaurants to 8 restaurants to, at the peak of my career, I was, head of marketing for a franchise group, which had, nearly 28 restaurants in 8 countries. So that really is the biggest chunk of the 50 restaurants. Yes. So after that, it was, another restaurant group with 10, and then another restaurant group with 6. And slowly, bit by bit, it's about 50. Yeah.
Now, I also said to you in the message, how old are you that you've managed 50 restaurants? Because you look about 22, and it's like, how have you managed? So you're one of these people as well that I kind of hate, that are just these massively high achievers. Like, how have you, so give us more of your background. How have you obviously had a lot of success, worked with massive international brands, managed 50 restaurants in 10 different countries. How did you get to that point? And like you said, you're a lady, so you're not going to share your age. But how have you?
I'm not 22 for sure. I'm definitely not 22.
But how have you achieved that much at such a relatively young age?
I think that when, like I said, I think when I was in the Middle East, it was just a land of opportunity. When I was in the Middle East, that was at the peak of when hotels were just being built every single month. There was a new restaurant every single week. So we're constantly looking for people. And I just was able to really move and jump and jump and jump. Whereas in a place like Singapore, people typically stay in certain positions for like 10, 15 years, right? So I think that I was just in a land of opportunities where, coming from a hospitality background. And I think, I did a podcast with Connor over here. He knows that basically the first 5 years of when I was in the Middle East, I went to night school like every single day. Not every single day, but I went to night school for almost like 2 or 3 years. So I was like working and studying constantly, doing like a ton of different courses, trying to make sure that I was constantly able to move up and move up and move up. Yeah. So I told myself that I was only going to leave the Middle East by a certain age when I was the head of marketing and earning a certain amount. So I think when I was a lot younger, I had a lot more energy to constantly just keep going. Yeah.
I mean, I had lots of energy when I was young, and I still never managed to achieve even 1% of that. So I am very impressed when people like yourself and can do things like that. It's interesting though, and I'm not like putting down your achievements as well. I think anytime that you ask that, or anytime I hear that question asked of anyone who's been successful in the industry, from music to art or whatever it is, or food and beverage, the word you said there was like the right kind of timing, like opportunity. But that doesn't take away from your achievement, because one of the things that frustrates me is when someone says I'm lucky or whatnot. You weren't lucky. Yeah. You worked hard to be in the right position at the right time. Like if you hadn't like done the night school, if you hadn't done all the hard work that you'd done, when that opportunity came along, you wouldn't have been able to take it. So it's not, and I'm not so, but it's interesting though how you just need that right timing, right, at the same time with the effort.
Yeah, definitely. I think like I was just so committed to what I knew I wanted to achieve that there was just no way that I was not going to allow myself to not get there. And I just, really saw, like, I'm constantly thinking, what do I need to do to get to where I want to be? And so just kept going and going. When I first moved to the Middle East, I didn't make a lot of money. I was really just, just a beginner level. But I wanted to eat at really nice restaurants. And so I applied to be a food writer for this pretty famous, like not pretty famous, but this like food blogger in the Middle East. And I applied and I said, I want to write for you because I want to eat at nice restaurants.
That is genius.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is genius.
Yeah, and that gave me a leg up and then to food writing and holding my skill. And it's the same for, I really like to indoor cycle, and I couldn't afford to indoor cycle. So I said, I want to be an instructor here.
Hold on a minute. Hold on.
Yeah.
I have never heard this sentence said before in my life. I like the indoor cycle.
Yeah, I like indoor cycling. I was really into indoor cycling and doing yoga, but I was so poor when I was 21, 22. Oh, yeah, but yeah, I love it.
Doing yoga is fine. Yeah. I love indoor cycling.
I love indoor cycling.
I
have like a bike.
Cycling is you get somewhere and you see something and like, what?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that's a new one. Did you ever go to the Salt Bay restaurant?
No, I never.
You didn't have the gold tomahawk steak? What is that, like $20,000?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I think that's just gimmicky kind of thing for a restaurant.
Even here at the Hard Rock Cafe, they had a gold-plated or gold-coated like a hamburger, which was like ridiculously expensive. And, you know, we did comedy shows there and stuff. So I said to the staff, I said, have you tried it? And they were like, yeah, we have. And I was like, is it good? And they're like, I mean, it's just the same. It doesn't really taste any different. It's just got some gold flakes on it. It's
yeah. There's a lot of food gimmicks out there, and I have my own thoughts about these things. But I don't personally like have any interest in paying like $1,000 for like a steak or anything. No. Yeah.
It's crazy, isn't it? So tell us a bit more. Then, what was that like living in the Middle East? Because we actually were very close to moving to Oman. We were going to leave Vietnam. We'd already packed up our stuff. We'd given up our apartment. We'd sold a bunch of stuff, and we were going to slowly move to Oman. And then I got offered the new job, a new job became available that I applied for. I got the job, and then that led us to now still living here. So, have you ever been to Oman, or where were you?
Yeah. I went to Oman. I lived in Dubai and Abu Dhabi for about 5 years. And then I moved to Malaysia, and then I moved here. And living in the Middle East is great, right? Like, it's adult Disneyland. There's a lot going on. It's a concrete jungle. There's so much glitz and glamour. There's a lot of money. Hospitality is great. So it was really fun to be there. But there's always a glass ceiling, I think, for a woman in the hospitality industry, and especially in the Middle East. So when I came to a point in my career, I kind of knew that I couldn't really break through certain things, not because I wasn't talented or hardworking. It just really boils down to race, language. And so I said, okay, probably go back to Asia. Yeah.
So break that down for me a little bit more.
Yeah.
How does that like eventuate? Like you're just passed over for promotion, or is it like things people say? Like, how do you know that you've hit that glass ceiling?
I think that like generally the hospitality industry is quite a patriarchal kind of industry, right? It's largely male dominated. And that in itself is already quite hard to be, let's say, a female in a management position or in decision-making position. And especially in the Middle East, where the culture itself is quite patriarchal. And then you slap on the fact that there's also, you know, the Islamic culture, which is a little bit more, that favors their own a little bit. Like, never quote me on this, but, you know, there is definitely like a hierarchy, right? There's a hierarchy. So I think that when I was living there, it just felt as if though, you know, I wasn't able to break through or get the kind of recognition or the kind of respect or to be taken seriously just for many of these factors. And that's why I said, I think it would be a lot easier. Not that I was looking for something easy, but it was just, you know, for what I wanted to do or the kind of impact that I wanted to make, it would be better in Asia, and more valuable in Asia. Yeah.
So what has attracted you to the food and beverage industry then?
I think from young, like I've been in the food and beverage industry since I was like 14. I think everybody has kind of done a side job in the food or beverage, like waiting tables or something like that. But I was so consistently like in the food and beverage industry. I love talking to people, and I think if anything, just how everything works together in a restaurant or in a hotel. So I always think of it like a game, right? Like if the food doesn't go out on time, then this gets impacted. It's like a domino effect, and I like how everything works together. And when you get it right, and the flow and everything just comes together, I think it's one of the most fulfilling feeling, you know. So I really like how everything in the food and beverage industry or in the hospitality industry all kind of intertwines together, and how much it deals with people. Yeah. So
it's quite a high pressure industry, isn't it? Like I mean, even from the way you're describing it, it's like a sport.
We'll be right back. Join pilot and adventurer Fernando Pino as he takes you on journeys to discover exciting destinations across the UK and Europe. You'll fly with him to hidden gems and experience local culture, from bustling streets to serene hideaways and the best places to eat, sleep, and play. Travel Plans is more than a podcast. It's your ticket to exploring the world and its history with a friend. In this episode, we are flying to discover a beachside paradise perfect for the whole family. Discover golden sands, activities galore, and even free childcare so you get your own break too. Why am I still here?
Yeah, it's like a video game. It's like you got to do like this one thing and then rush somewhere. You got to do something. You got to like do something. And it's always like, oh, if I didn't do something, you got to go back to square one. So it's always, I like, you know, that you can really feel and see that progress like really happening right in front of your eyes. That satisfaction like right in front of your eyes. It's cool. And no day is the same because the market's constantly changing. But at the same time, like everybody still eats 3 times a day. So it's so exciting, right? Like, you know, when you think about it, or maybe it's just me.
No, so I mean, I worked in hospitality when I was younger.
Yeah, exactly.
In several countries. I've worked in New York. I've worked in Australia. Only in Scotland a little bit. But yeah, I've got to. You've made me think of a funny story. Now, this is going to kill you. Okay, you understand the pain of this, right? Yeah. So I worked in a very busy cafe.
Yeah.
And the orders come in thick and fast for the coffees, right? And then you know what it's like when people order coffee. I don't know if anyone who's listening has worked in a cafe or a restaurant. You know, it's like a skinny milk, almond milk, half shot, double shot, shot, you know, and then all these permutations just for coffee. It can be any of these permutations. It's probably almost infinite how many different ways people can order coffee, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a crazy Sunday morning in this cafe, right? We're packed out the door, you know, there's a line and it's crazy. And you're trying to like see which coffee's which and which ticket so you can deliver it to the right table and whatnot. And then this woman, she goes, "Oh, I've already got my coffee. I just picked it up off the counter."
Oh no.
I was like that's not your coffee. You know, there's like about 50 coffees up here right now, and they're all different and they're all very specific.
That must be so frustrating. Yeah, it's crazy. I think it's so crazy, like how the coffee industry is very interesting to me because nobody used to drink coffee in the way we drink coffee now.
Not at all. No.
And if you even look at food, nobody eats the way how they used to eat. And I think that when you see the evolution of food and how people are ordering or eating, it's, you know, we see that it's so much like a learned behavior, and you can see what's happening in the market and what's happening to people. So like when people look at food, I never really look at food as like just food. I always see like, okay, what's happening in the market is making them eat this way, or or try to understand why they're eating this way. Yeah, and I think that's the part that's like so interesting.
So that's like a whole nother level. That's so interesting because what I'm
Yeah.
talking about, what I'm just my example of a story there is what happens to one server on one day on one instance, right? But again, you're one of these people that you're like looking at it like this, which is always, I always think of CEOs or anyone who's high in a company. And I'm like, they just see the world in a different light because they look at it from up here. And like you kind of mentioned as well, like, oh, you love the flow of it and seeing all these different things. So you're seeing everything and then trying to put it all together. Whereas I'm thinking of it from the point of view of the one server and I need to take this one coffee to this one person. So explain to me more that what do you see then when you look from above at the food industry? And let's bring it to Vietnam then. So we'll talk in Vietnam.
Yeah. So when I look at the food industry and what I look usually at like a country like Vietnam that's really modernizing and going through a lot of change, especially when it undergoes a black swan event like the pandemic, just looking at how people are eating, you can tell a lot about how they're feeling and what that might mean for the industry. So for example, during the pandemic, 39% of Vietnamese people actually stopped eating raw meat. So you and it's one of the countries that actually one of the countries that has the largest population of people that stopped eating raw meat, right? Like obviously the pandemic is a zoonotic disease, but why Vietnam why is it so high? And then you realize that there's a huge food safety issue, right? And then you realize that deeper than the food safety issue is that there's a huge distrust in their own goods by the Vietnamese people, which if you look at the research and studies, a lot of it is actually drawn to the fact that, Vietnam is a country that has been undergone one war after another, right? So they don't really trust a lot of their own products, especially raw food that's developed here in Vietnam itself, because there's so little faith in the government and guidelines as well. And the third thing is you will see that a lot of Vietnamese people last year, because of the swine flu and the lack of education within the food industry itself, they actually stopped eating pork as well. And coupled with the pandemic, they just completely avoided meat altogether. So I think
I didn't know that at all. I'd never heard that before. I did not know that.
So last year, 80,000 pigs were caught in Vietnam because of swine flu. And you can see again when, the recent story about how the old couple had COVID and 12 of those dogs got killed, you can see there's a huge, this relationship with animals. It's not just, oh yeah, they hate animals. It's, you can really anchor it back into a lot of these things. And it's because it's tied to this, they don't trust people easily. And why do they not trust people easily? It's because, it's a country that's just been screwed over, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when people, so I really think that by how people eat, you can really see how things are changing or how culture is, right? Yeah.
So how has this is one of the biggest questions I wanted to ask you. How has the food and beverage industry dealt with this lockdown? We were basically, their businesses were mandated to be closed completely for how long? 2 months, was it? When it was just no deliveries?
Yeah, so it's about two months. Yeah.
Yeah. So it would be similar. Maybe there's a few industries that would be similar, like cinemas or gyms and art and things like this.
Yeah.
So it's one of the few industries that basically had to just shut their doors.
Yeah.
How do they survive? How are they still open today? I just don't understand. I take my hat off to these owners and these staff that are doing this. How does that happen?
Honestly, I think that the ones that you need to have enough capital flow to survive. And a lot of businesses, I think people don't see, actually have gone out of business, right? Because even though restaurants are open for delivery now, you don't make money, right? And that's why you still see that restaurants are closed, because they're like, why would I go through so much trouble to be open and without the possibility of really, really being able to make money. So I think that the restaurants, that's why I believe that restaurants that want to be open now are doing it for the people. They're really just opening because, people are calling them, I want some food. They're doing a couple of deliveries right now. And they want their staff to come back for motivation. If you ask any restaurant owner right now that's just open for delivery or takeaway, having to probably pay for all the staff to be fully vaccinated and pay for all the staff to be, have COVID testing every 2 or 3 days, they're not making money. Mm-hmm. They're just trying to not be forgotten.
Yeah, it's such a healthy point.
Yeah.
And I've interviewed on this show a few seasons ago, Calvin Bui. Who's now, like, it's crazy, his channel, fucking deliciousness.
Yeah.
He's crazy. I mean, I met Calvin first, like when we first came here just over 5 years ago, when he had a small Mexican place on Boy VN, and you're walking down the street and then some crazy guy just starts yelling at you, and you're like, why is this guy yelling at us? And then it's Calvin inviting for shots of tequila. But when I interviewed him, you can hear they just want to feed people. Like, that was basically what he said. He's like, and it's such a weird industry in so many ways.
Yeah.
And most people are not getting into restaurants to make money. They're doing it because of the love, which is something, I mean, I love eating food, but I don't have that same passion as you for the industry.
No, for sure.
Same passion. I was going to say to you earlier, is it almost like a cult?
The restaurant industry?
Yeah.
I think that there's always a cult in every in every country within like chefs and stuff like that, right? You have to also understand, being in hospitality, our days of work are very, everybody works 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. That's probably our day of rest. Like Monday we're off, Tuesdays maybe we're off, right? Like weekends is our work day. So because we can't really socialize with people, normal people, the hospitality industry is just very united, because they are the ones that finish at 2, 3 a.m. and then they go out.
Yeah, I like I said, I've worked in the industry.
Exactly, right?
I'm excited after we've finished to ask one of the people that are here watching this live podcast who has worked in the industry and who hasn't, and what are their experiences, because it's such a unique place where, so I've had my jobs where I've worked Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. You get a break, you pay 2 hours, you go for a cup of tea, you get paid holidays, you get vacations. But then you have these people that worked in the bar industry or the restaurant industry where you don't get a break all day, you don't get paid vacations, you don't get anything, but they love the job,
Yeah. Honestly, like I think that if you are, if you want to have like a career, like a long-term career in the industry, you gotta love what you do, because there's no other reason that you would want to work weekends, you want to work nights, you want to work on birthdays, you want to work on New Year's Eve or Christmas, besides the fact that because, making somebody else's day is more important than, your own time, right? Or, being in the kitchen and being able to create and have somebody really enjoy it. It's long hours. Sometimes you get shouted at by customers, but it's nothing, like, you really need to be a service-driven person. Like, if you talk to chefs, it's like, sometimes, why do they deliver food, or, risk getting fined just to deliver food? You're not making money. It's really because, people during lockdown and quarantine, they're like, this fresh bread means so much to me.
Yeah, when you put it like that, it really makes you wonder how the industry exists. When you say about, and it's true, people, you miss New Year's, you miss birthdays, you miss Christmas, it's Mother's Day, you have to work late. Like, as I said, I done this lifestyle, and if it's fun, like there's definitely something about it that attracts you to it.
Yeah.
You meet people. There's something about serving drinks and serving food, and I don't know what it is exactly. There is definitely something about this lifestyle that becomes attractive. But it's unbelievable that there are people in this world who are so dedicated to service or dedicated to that lifestyle, so that everyone else can go out and have a good time.
I know. I also think that it's fantastic. But I read the other day an article that was saying that besides the social environment, the delicious food, restaurants, and not just restaurants, cafes, street food, places that people gather, they are just really the backbone of communities, right? Like, just now I was just out and I got a drink, and I wanted to hang out with friends and just look at life. And we were sat at just a flight of stairs. And I realized that people need to hang out and sit at places, because that's where they build community. That's where communities are built. These are hubs for community, backbones of community.
Absolutely. I mean, even I'm worried that we might have you frozen now. Are you there? Oh, wait, I think we lost you for a second. Yeah, you're back. All right. Yeah, I mean, people it's something that people meet around and gather, right? Like, I mean,
yeah.
I don't think I've ever really met my friends for a cup of tea. I'll meet my friends for a beer, or I meet my friends for food. And even today, because obviously restaurants are still closed and coffee places are still closed, we went out for a walk and we got a takeaway coffee to walk with. And there was this group of 4 or 5 kind of young Vietnamese people all hanging out on their motorbikes with a takeaway coffee, and it's like you said, they're okay, we can't sit in a coffee place, and they weren't breaking any rules, but they're just hanging out together, sharing a coffee, So, it's a strange but a kind of wonderful industry. So what do you see next then for Vietnam? Because obviously here, the thing about Vietnam, which is so not unique, because there's probably other countries that are similar, but makes it quite different. The fact that I can go out and get a bowl of pho for 20,000 dong, or I can probably go and buy a steak for $200. Like, the disparity in how much you can spend here is bigger than probably most places in the world. Like, most places, there's obviously a disparity in prices, but here it's huge. And like you say, there's the mom and pop places and the local food, which is delicious. But now we're having more and more and more high-end restaurants, especially obviously more in Saigon. I often say Vietnam, but what I actually mean is Saigon, because Saigon is different to Vietnam, right? So let's say Saigon. So what do you see for the future of the restaurant industry in Saigon coming out of this lockdown?
So coming out of this lockdown, I think the question you're asking is very much twofold. Like, firstly, structurally, like, it will look different. Like, chairs and tables are going to look very far apart. People are going to be masked. So structurally, I think like it will look very different. But Vietnam is like many of the Southeast Asian countries that were really trying to modernize and industrialize, right? It's going to really see a big shift in the way people dine as well, with a growing middle class. And that's why you can now see a lot more like premium or like upscale or like elevated restaurants that are opening. And I think that this is very, very, very important for 2 reasons, right? So you will see, and I wrote a very lengthy article about this. So Vietnamese cuisine has, like Southeast Asian cuisine in general, has always been regarded as street food and quite low class, right? Whenever you think of high class cooking, you look to the West. And if anybody asks you to pay for a pho anything more than, let's say, 7,000-8,000, you're like, that's crazy, right? That's no
unless
way.
it's
No way. But if you look to Japan and Korea, people are willing to pay hundreds of dollars just for a bowl of udon, because there's so much respect to the art of Japanese cuisine and the technique. But Vietnamese cuisine is equally the same. If you look at like a bowl of barbecue, they actually boil that broth for like days. the technique of making all this food is it's so difficult, and I think it definitely just hasn't got the kind of light that it needs. But anyway, this new wave of chefs and restaurants, what they're really trying to do is to shine light on the food industry in Vietnam, to show people around the world and say, you know what, we don't just do street food. We do have real talent here, right? And a lot of them, you look at the younger chefs, they're really trying to say, you know what, Vietnamese cuisine is really cool. It is really good. We've got this like myriad of brilliant ingredients. We have these cooking techniques, like, which are so proper. Please look at it and stop thinking that this is just street food. So it's really important for us to be open-minded, to be like, hey, you know what? Let's learn more. Let's eat Vietnamese food and give it the kind of respect that it deserves, because you know what, it's I've read and I've studied and I've talked to chefs about Vietnamese cuisine, and you talk about, it's such an intricate cuisine because it has so many influences from China, from France and stuff like that, right? So if you learn about it, actually, it's very interesting. And when you look at a balance of flavors, when you look at fermentation, it's quite similar to, let's say, the Japanese cooking techniques. But why is it people like refuse to regard it in the same level? So the new wave of these Japanese Vietnamese restaurants and Vietnamese chefs are trying to tell this story, trying to really make Vietnamese cuisine known around the world for something just beyond pho, beyond like banh mi, which was largely driven by the Vietnamese diaspora overseas in the 80s, right? Or the boat people that went abroad, they opened up all these pho and banh mi restaurants just because they needed to do something. And those were the easiest ingredients probably to procure, or probably the ones that would have been most widely accepted in whatever country they resided in. So the F&B industry here is really trying to change that. And I do see, this year, for the first time in the last 8 years, Vietnam made the Asia's top 50. So there's a lot more attention that's being placed on the chefs here. Also because we see a lot of chefs actually returning from overseas. You have Peter Kwong Franklin, Anand, he came back. We have a lot of these chefs that are trying to come back, make their lives themselves. In the 2000s, the Vietnamese government gave them, gave these Viet Qs this renewed visa that say, hey, you know what? Come back, we'll give you citizenship. So a lot of them came back. We saw about 500,000 of them come back. And they're doing all these really cool things. So yeah, I think that in the next couple of years, we're going to see a lot more media attention on this particular segment of the F&B industry, particularly on Vietnamese cuisine, Vietnamese spirits, Vietnamese beverage industry, and I'm very excited for it because it's largely driven by Vietnamese as well as foreigners who are here.
It's really exciting, and I think it's just part of a larger trend that over the probably post-war Vietnam has been so heavily reliant on Western influence, Western education, Western expats coming over, bringing food, bringing engineering skills, and they're still relying on that for many industries. Like, I was talking to a friend who works in the wind industry, renewable energy, and that's still very much reliant on having overseas people come over with their expertise and knowledge. But what I think you're describing is something that I talked about with Tracy Nguyen Mang on the previous 2 episodes ago. We're talking about this explosion of the Vietnamese diaspora around the world. But I guess what even you're saying as well is even within Vietnam, and I think, and again, it's hard to tell because I'm obviously very aware of this because of this podcast and because of the different people I talk to, different industries. But it does seem like there's almost like a renaissance of Vietnamese people here and around the world. And I guess that's just, 50 years post-war and the 80s was, I always forget the name. What was it called again? The Doi
Moi. Yeah.
Doi Moi, right?
Yeah.
So we're now seeing the effects of that. You're seeing, as I didn't realize that number, 500,000 people coming back with that knowledge.
Yeah.
I think we're starting to see the result of that here in Vietnam and around the world. So you're seeing, like, Kelly Marie Tran on Star Wars. You're seeing
definitely.
Ian Tran has just been cast in How I Met Your Father. Ali Wong is half Vietnamese. We've got the Vietnamese diaspora around the world is just exploding and becoming known for more than just food.
Yeah,
but obviously food is the key. And you mentioned Peter Kung Franklin. I was about to say that. I was just talking to him by message yesterday. So I've been talking to him for a while about coming on the podcast. So hopefully he'll be on for season 8. We're planning. He's busy right now, as you can imagine, with everything that's going on in the industry. But if Peter watches this episode, we will hopefully have him on for season 8. So but it's an exciting time for Vietnam, I think, very much, and the food and beverage is part of that. My one quick question, and then we're going to move on to a different topic, is why do you think the Vietnam cuisine hasn't been so highly regarded? Is it just because it's seen as cheap?
Both Saigon Children's Charity and Blue Dragon have emergency COVID appeals. The outbreak of the Delta variant is wreaking havoc on vulnerable communities across Vietnam. Families are struggling to survive. They need your help, especially impoverished children. You can sponsor a COVID backpack now with Saigon Children's Charity, containing food staples, hygiene necessities, books, and games to a child in COVID-affected areas in Vietnam, so that they know they are taken care of physically and mentally. Or in the north, you can donate an emergency food pack through Blue Dragon. It contains fruit and vegetables, rice and staples to keep children and families going. Food will be bought locally and will include a mix of fresh food and longer lasting items. For families who are hard to reach, your donation will provide a cash grant to buy food at the local market. The links to donate are in the description, and if you're in a position to, please donate whatever you can. Thanks.
Why do you think the Vietnam cuisine hasn't been so highly regarded? Is it just because it's seen as cheap?
Honestly, I think that it's not just Vietnamese cuisine. Like, I'm Singaporean. Singaporean cuisine will always be tied to chicken rice and street food. And that's fair because this is the bedrock of, our culture, right? But what it really does is it makes what the new Vietnamese chefs, what they're trying to do, it waters down what they're trying to do, because people will always compare it back to street food. Like, they'll be, this is not really real Vietnamese cuisine. So it's very hard for them to be able to innovate within Vietnamese cuisine or to serve Vietnamese cuisine, because it will always be compared to street food. And it's the thing that you don't want is Vietnamese chefs opening restaurants serving French cuisine, because you know what I'm trying to say? Like, longevity and these kind of things.
I think I'm guilty of what you're talking about. As we're talking about this food, I'm like, but it's not going to be as good as the pork color that I can get for $30 on the street corner. Like, I'm not really into going out and having like a high-end meal. Like, I'm just not at that place. So I guess you're describing me, like, because I'm like, not really street food. Yeah, that's interesting. So it's a big barrier to get by, especially if you're used to these levels.
Exactly. So a lot of it makes it very difficult for a lot of these chefs that come out of their countries. Let's say Vietnamese chefs or Singaporean chefs, even Indonesian chefs. They want to come out. Obviously, they want to do a cuisine that's close to their heart. And then it makes it very difficult because the market doesn't understand what they're trying to do. Or, they will always be compared to Vietnamese street food. And the reason that I believe that Vietnamese street food is always pegged to be a very low or, cheap food, it's really like what I mentioned, right? Like it's because nobody is aware that Vietnamese cuisine can be a certain way. nobody is aware of Vietnamese, like finer dining food. Like if you look at China and Japan and Korea, they have had imperial cuisine because they have had this period of imperialism. Right. But in Vietnam, never. They've always just been colonized they've always just been colonized. So they've never had their own Vietnamese, fine cuisine. So nobody knows what that is. And that's why this new generation of chefs, you're really trying to come up with what that means. Like if you go to China, you can eat Chinese street food, but we also know what good Chinese food is. Like there's shark's fin, there's abalone, there's, really good stuff. And people are like, yeah, okay, I can pay for this. I know that there's good Chinese restaurants that's picking that, right? So we understand this. But in Vietnam, you just don't have that. So it just firstly never existed. So everything that the world, even the Vietnamese, know of Vietnamese cuisine is street food. And then secondly, it's because the diaspora went around and brought this everywhere. That's why everyone just comes here and they all want to have a banh mi because it's all they've ever tried. So that's why my job here is to really focus and write about these things. Yeah.
Well, this brings me on to my next question. And so, being in the Middle East, being from Singapore, why are you in Vietnam? How did you end up here?
So I came here to open up a fitness studio, my indoor cycling studio. It's really funny. So it was like a big pivot.
That wasn't a joke. This is a real story.
This is a real story. This is actually a real story. And I think that this is the usual reaction that also everybody gives to me. Everybody just laughs, right? Yeah. But I did come here to open up a indoor cycling studio. And the reason why is, so besides being a food marketer and writer, I was very, I'm also an indoor cycling instructor. I was anyway, and I was really into indoor cycling. It was really my form of, exercise and mental release, okay? And last year, I was so burnt out from my job. So absolutely burnt out. So tired. And I worked for an airline and it was just so trying, right? And during the pandemic, I can only tell you how painful it was. I think when you see, every 3 months, just hordes of your colleagues just getting let go and getting let go and getting let go. It's a very anxiety inducing period for me, at least. And I said that I didn't want to be in the industry doing what I was doing anymore. Because I was so tired at the end of it. And so I said I wanted to do something that made me feel good or made people feel good. So that's what I wanted to do when I came to Vietnam.
So we're going to pick up on one thing. An indoor cycling instructor.
Yeah.
Well, what do? Sit on the bike, go. What? This seems like I'm a walking instructor. What do you do? Just put one foot in front of the other. How do you instruct someone to cycle?
It's not. Okay, so it's a concept.
I'm being very cruel and facetious.
I know you are. The concept of the indoor cycling was called soulful cycling. It was really a soulful cycling concept. So if you're familiar with concepts from the US, it's Soul Cycle, which has really taken off in the US, right? And in many parts of the country. And it's being immersed in a dark room where you're just surrounded by candle lights. And instead of asking somebody to go, 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 you motivate them. And you channel inner and intrinsic motivation to get people to do better and show up for themselves and move on the bike. Yeah, so that was kind of what I was doing, cheerleading.
No, that's
I was just cheerleading people.
It just it makes me laugh even more because I don't know if anyone who's listening to this, probably someone will have heard of Devin Gray, who's one of my good friends and a very, very funny comedian. And my favorite ever joke of his is when he talks about going to a spinning class.
Oh my goodness.
And he just stops cycling. And the instructor comes up to him and she says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm going downhill."
Yeah, exactly.
Which is it's always one of my favorite jokes. But so we've obviously kind of talked about this before the podcast, and so it's something that you're comfortable with talking about.
Of course.
And it's something that, so I obviously follow you on Facebook and your social media. It's really refreshing that you post a lot about mental health. And I know that before I'd ever even, I think, spoke to you, I'd seen on your blog or whatnot that, as you mentioned, one of the reasons why you left your job in the airline, one of the reasons you came to Vietnam was because of being, stressed out, anxiety, as you mentioned. And it's still something that you post about, often, daily, frequently, about managing your mental health, having mental health issues, which is so refreshing. And it's something that's more common, these days. And I sound like an old man often. I often say things that make me sound like an old man. I say the word television a lot, which my wife calls me out on. She said, "Do you know how old you sound? It's a TV, not a television." That's how old I am. I don't watch the TV, I watch the television. But it's obviously something that's becoming more prominent these days, which I think is amazing, because it's something that was like just nobody ever spoke about mental health. And it's refreshing when I look on your story and you're very candidly honest about it, more so than maybe other people, and not in a bad way, in a really great way. So tell us more about why have you made that decision to be so refreshingly candid about mental health and how you deal with that?
Yeah. So I've had anxiety since I was, I don't know, I think 9. Whoa, almost revealed my age there.
22, you're 22.
No. I've had anxiety for almost a decade. So, I remember when I had my first panic attack, how painful it was. And I'm not sure if anybody here has ever had like a panic attack before or an anxiety attack before. It was, one of the most scary things that I think I've ever gone through before. And thankfully, my mom during that time, she had it. So my mom has anxiety, and, she's had a history of mental health, in kind of a similar way like me. And I was able to get the support she, I needed, to go and see a counselor and to have somebody really just tell me like, "Oh, don't worry," not don't worry, but like, "Oh, this is normal. You're fine. You're safe." And, just helping me to understand that what I was going through was not this crazy, like huge thing, because, when I had it at the time, I didn't tell anybody. And I thought that I was going crazy and I was going to end up in, the mental health, like jail behind some room, and I was not going to be able to see anybody, because that's what you think, right? That's what you think people who are have mental health issues are. You're on the street, you're talking to random people, on the train, and you're that crazy person like on the train. And that was what I thought was happening to me. So
I think that's the stigma though, right?
yeah,
That's
exactly. So, I remember suffering with that and thinking that, the fear of that happening, and not knowing what was going on was so much bigger than what I was going through. So that's why, to me, it's so important to change this idea of, what somebody with anxiety or mental health issue might look like. Like, I still get on with my day, I still am able to achieve great things. I'm still able to do great things. I'm still able to be in a loving relationship. So I think that I want to talk about these things because I just want to normalize it, because I think when you normalize it, it makes people want to talk about it more. you'll feel more comfortable to talk about it more. And I think when you can talk about it, you realize, hey, you know what? Actually, it's not that it's not a big deal, but it's like, oh, I can still live a really normal life. Yeah, okay, that's okay. You know what I'm trying to say? And I think like,
absolutely. I think with anything, even like not just mental health, like physical health, you have like a pain in your arm and you're like, oh my God, my arm's falling off. What's going to happen to me?
Exactly.
And then you go to the doctor and he's like, oh no, it's just like this. I remember when I get migraines every 6 months or something. And when I first started getting migraines, I thought I was going blind. I thought I had a brain cancer.
Exactly.
And then you go to the doctor and you explain your symptoms and he's like, oh yeah, it's a migraine. And you're like, oh, okay, I feel so much better now. This is like,
exactly. It's like everybody gets migraines. It's fine. It'll be gone tomorrow. It's okay. Nothing's really wrong with you. You're fine. And, you know, like, that's really what I think, you know, people just need to know. Like, you know, anxiety, 1 in 4 people, so common. Like, it's fine. You don't have to beat yourself up over it. You don't have to, you know, feel like a complete failure or loser just because you had something like that. So you just want to, and
well, to go kind of full circle back to the beginning as well. So, you know, you're obviously only 22 years old, as we've established.
I'm only 21 years old, correct?
Oh, 21 now. You're
I'm kidding.
I said 22. But obviously, you know, successful in your field, doing amazing things. You've come onto the Saigon scene, and like I think I said in the description for the show, you've made a splash in the Saigon scene. You've been like a hurricane in the Saigon scene. You kind of came in out of nowhere, and then your blog has blown up. And I obviously I followed what you were doing before we'd ever talked to each other. So it's refreshing as well from the point of view that from the outset, you see this person who's achieving a lot. Then we became Facebook friends. And then I see your stories. Yeah. And your stories is like one after the other, or not one after the other, but like very often and frequently talking about your mental health issues. Like, I've had this today, I've had that today, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, oh, like this is a person who is high functioning, high achieving, but they're a normal person who has their daily troubles, like many people, like at least 1 in 4, like you mentioned. So it's a very brave thing that you've done, and I think I applaud that, and it's amazing to see.
Yeah. I actually, like, I think a lot, like not a lot, but so when I started talking about my mental health issues, I also don't really like a lot of the words that are typically associated with mental health, because I don't think it's an illness. I don't think it's an issue. I think it's really just, you know, like a personality, or, you know, something that you just have, like a character trait, right? When I first started vocalizing, and one thing that I'm very vocal about is also taking medication for it. I'm medicated. I do take it when I have an anxiety attack. I'm not on daily medication, but I want to advocate that it's completely fine that you take it if it's because I know how painful it can be. And I think that there's no shame in taking medication if it hurts or if it helps you. So that's also one thing that I really like I'm very open about, because I just know, like, I don't understand why people are so averse to medication. It's almost like, if you take it, that means you're definitely sick. And there's so many ways that there's so many things that we really need to almost like disprove, right? Like, why does it mean that if you're taking medication, you're sick? It's almost like taking a Panadol if you've got pain. So why can't we, like, why does it mean that if you take a little Xanax for anxiety attack, because it's really that painful, that people have to judge you for it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
have you seen the Louis Theroux documentary? It's probably quite old now, maybe 10, maybe even 15 years old.
I wasn't born then.
I know, exactly. You were a child.
I wasn't born then.
You know who Louis Theroux is? He's a British documentary maker. Yeah. And he does one about medication in the United States. And they obviously probably over-medicate in the United States. But I remember there was one, I think he was a teenager or pre-teen who had massive, more than just mental health issues, or I know that's maybe not the best way to say it, as we just discussed, issues, but massive behavioral problems and whatnot. And there's an argument that, you shouldn't be medicating kids. And I know it's not the same thing, but you could see in this documentary that the medication worked. Like, he was able to be a more functioning human being when he took the medication, because the documentary showed you what he was like off of it. It showed you what he was like on it. And it's really difficult, because you're like, oh, well, we shouldn't be medicating kids. And again, I know we're not talking about medicating kids. It's a bit of a sidetrack. But still, for people who are like, oh, well, you shouldn't take medication, but it's like, but it helps, like a Panadol.
Definitely. And I think that, when it comes to mental health, like, like certain disorders, for me, I was like, very, very admittedly, I was quite heavily medicated a while ago, like a long while ago. And what it does to you is bring you down to a level where you're able to be logical and not just lost in your own thoughts. And when you are able to function day to day and see things logically and go into situations that are usually anxiety inducing and realize like, hey, you know what? Actually, this isn't so scary. Like for me, I had really bad flight. I still can't. I have very bad flight anxiety, and for the very longest time, I couldn't fly until I was like, you know what? I really love to fly and I love to travel, right? So I said I couldn't do this anymore, and I took 1 year off to travel, and yeah, I think you might have seen I took like 40 flights in 1 year, just really because I needed to desensitize. And my psychiatrist told me, you know what? Just take the Xanax in moderate amounts, because you need to calm down and see that the situation that you're in is not as scary as your brain makes you think you are. So I think that sometimes medication can actually be quite helpful, especially for mental health, because sometimes whatever's in your thoughts, in your brain, is a lot scarier than what the reality is. And you just need the medication to help you see with clearer eyes.
Well, the other thing that I remember from that same documentary was, it was a different documentary by Louis Theroux, and he was looking into alcoholism, but not just like, people who drink a lot throughout their life, like people who can go from being completely sober to absolutely blind, drunk, and completely a different person. And there was this one guy, I think he was German, or he was European, but he was living in the UK. And he was kind of followed this pattern of getting blind drunk, either injuring himself or injuring others or whatnot. And they followed his story throughout the documentary. And then near the end, they went back and interviewed him again. And he was completely sober, because he had gone to a psychiatrist and he'd been medicated, and he realized that he'd been self-medicating through alcohol. So he had a mental health challenge, and he didn't know he was doing it, but he was just drinking so much alcohol, like vodka bottles. And as soon as he got put on, I can't remember the medication, but as soon as he got put on the medication, stopped drinking immediately, because that was what he was self-medicating, which...
Oh, yeah.
As I take a sip of beer, we're probably all doing.
Yeah. Self-medication.
Now, final question before we move on to the final questions. On the same topic. So how have you dealt with your mental health during this lockdown? Because so I'll be honest, for me, I don't really have mental health issues. Like I have challenges every now and again, but I don't have any anxiety and things like this. But this lockdown has probably been one of the most difficult mental health challenges of my life. And I've not had a difficult life, so I don't have much to compare it to, and I'm not trying to make it so dramatic. But being locked up all day, every day with my wife was the most difficult thing. She's giving me a dirty look. No, that was the easiest thing about it. But being locked up all day, every day was obviously difficult. And some days I just felt like shit. Some days I felt horrible. I felt terrible.
Yeah.
Just a crap day. And but I was already starting from a position of not having very many mental health challenges. So how did you deal then with the lockdown already having that? Because that seems like that would be quite difficult.
Yeah, the lockdown at the begining, my road was, I was living in one of these cordon off areas where like,
that's who you,
yeah. So I was like in one of these, 50-meter, like, lockdowns where I couldn't get my own food, couldn't get anything, right?
Yeah.
And that was quite suffocating. I remember actually going into anxiety because, one of the things it's like, one of the things with like anxiety is like sometimes you feel the symptoms and you're scared like maybe it's a lot more serious than it is. Yeah. Like if you feel like your chest's getting tight, you're like, oh no, what if like I'm dying? Like what if something's happened and I can't get to the hospital in time? There's like none of the hospitals are open, none of the pharmacies are open. So like that was like a constant thought that was in my head, which made like the lockdown very stressful. I think some of the tips that was, and I mean, I'm very, very lucky as well. This is my 10th year going into anxiety. I've gotten to know myself a lot better, what my triggers are, and also like what my self-soothing is. I'm also very open to talking about it. So sometimes like when my anxiety is really bad, my chest gets really tight and I feel like cannot breathe. So usually what then I need to do is pick up the phone and talk to somebody, say like, hey, like I'm having an anxiety. I need to talk to somebody, just to talk to somebody. And because I'm quite comfortable to talk about how I feel, and I have support systems around me that understand that this is just what I need to do. That was one of the things. And that's why I really want to normalize it, because I really want to I want people to be able to pick up the phone and talk about it because it's so helpful. Right? And realize,
absolutely. Even as I mentioned, it was one of my toughest periods.
Yeah.
In these last 2 months. And I come from a kind of like sales and marketing background from a few years ago where everything had to be positive. Like your arm is falling off and you're like, how are you doing today? And you're like, yeah, I'm great. I'm got like one arm. I don't need two. Everything's amazing, So they have to be almost overly positive, which is good in a way. And I think that has helped my mental strength massively, like absolutely massively. But for the first time during this lockdown, I allowed myself to be vulnerable. So if someone would ask me, like, how are you doing? I'd be like, I'm not doing good today. Or I'd message like my family who I'm quite close with, and I'd be like, I'm having a shit day today, which I'd never done before. I'd never, ever done that before.
Yeah.
And I would message people as well. I'd be like, how are you doing? Are you okay?
Yeah, of course.
And try and have those conversations. So even if I was doing okay, I would try and reach out to other people and be like, how are you? Because it was fucking tough. And it was one of the things that I always tried to keep perspective was, it wasn't that tough. I'm in this like nice apartment with my wife and I'm hanging out and I've got food and I've got water and I've got electricity and, there's people down the road that don't have anything. So always trying to maintain that perspective. But at the same time, you're like, man, this is tough. I didn't have a point. I didn't really have a point or a question.
No. But like, I completely understand. And I think that one of the things that, during the pandemic, a lot of people are like, it's tough. It's tough for everybody, whether you are a rich billionaire to somebody on the road. But a lot of people they don't allow themselves, they don't think their feelings are valid because you're not on the street starving. And I'm thinking like, that's not fair. Like, of course you can't do that. Like, it's hard. It's very, very hard.
So I talk quite often with he's the executive director of a big charity here in Saigon. And he said exactly what you said. His staff were having a really difficult time. But they kept saying, like, because they were helping these people that were the most vulnerable, that were like didn't have rice, didn't have food, didn't have anything, and they wouldn't allow themselves to feel what they were feeling.
Yeah.
Because they were like, well, but we don't have it as bad as them. And so him as the executive director of the organization, he was having to say to them what we just said, like, you need to allow yourself to feel what you're feeling, because it's still tough for you. So even though these people are having a horrible, difficult time, that doesn't negate the fact that you are also having a horrible, difficult time as well.
Definitely. I think that a lot of people have negated their feelings, but at the same time felt that have like they bear the burden of a lot of things around them right now, because they don't feel that they should be allowed to feel sad or upset. But at the same time, they're taking on the burden of so many people out there. Like, you're doing charity, your employees are maybe struggling. There's a lot of things going on. But one of the things that you ask, like, go back to your question, how I took care of myself is, every single day, like, I meditate and I really check in with myself, like how am I feeling today? Am I okay? Am I okay? And am I mentally healthy to be able to go out and ask somebody if they're okay and help somebody? Because if you're not, then you can't really take care of other people as well.
Yeah, at one point I considered doing like a kind of Facebook post, and obviously with 7 million bikes, it's got a certain reach more than my own personal page. And I thought about putting out a post and kind of being like, if you need help, get in touch with me, and I'm here to talk. And my wife, who is infinitely smarter than me, she said to me, she's like, if you do that, are you ready to take that on? And I was like, yeah, probably not. Yeah, so I didn't do it. I was like, yeah, I'm probably not ready to put myself out there like that,
Yeah.
So,
and that's fair. When I was sharing about my mental health, like, you can't imagine how many people actually messaged me telling me that they felt the same. Or they had depression, or they had anxiety, and they had gone through so much. And, and somebody that I didn't know at all messaged me and said, Jovel, I had a close friend of mine rush to the hospital because of panic attacks. Like, can you tell me how to make it better and stuff like that? And I'm so blessed that I went through my first panic attack 10 years ago, that I've come to a point where I'm very okay with my anxiety. But if I had to go through a panic attack now alone in an expat, it must be so difficult. Like, I don't understand why we're not talking about it more. Last year in Malaysia, I volunteered with a mental health NGO, and it was crazy. Like, it was really crazy.
Well, I think there's the benefit of your stories that you post, that if people see it, like we kind of talked about, then they're like, oh, it's not just me. This other person feels the same. So it's normalized. And to go back what we kind of said before as well, that stigma, I think, those are, like you said, I don't want to be the crazy person talking to myself on the street. Through media, seeing people like that. But that's probably what people think. Like, I don't want to be that crazy person. Like, like if I have mental health problems, then that means I'm going to be on the street talking to myself, feeding the pigeons. Like
yeah. Of course.
For the people that messaged you, again, it's probably good to be like, oh, this, like, it can almost be so trivial, because you're just kind of like, yeah, it's normal. But that reaction can almost be the best, because then they're just like, oh, all right, okay, yeah, I can chill out. I don't need to stress so much. Now, I said at the very beginning of this podcast that I love these episodes because they end up running to 2 hours. And I either have to make them into 2 parts, or I have to edit the shit out of them. And I had a question before from Zion, who I don't even know if he's still here because we've talked for so long. But he said, why don't you release the 2 parts back to back? Because if I do an episode in 2 parts, I'll still release them a week apart. And that's just to give people the chance to listen to the first part, and then because it takes a few days for people to listen to it and then listen to the second part. But this is going on. It's been so good and so enjoyable. And then only when we get to this point will I be like, okay, we need to stop talking. For people like Zion and others who are regular listeners to the podcast, you'll have heard me say this before. The sign of a good episode and a good interview, and they're all good. But the sign of a really good one is when myself and the guest could just keep talking. So if I don't stop us talking now, we could probably talk for 3 or 4 hours. And I'm not Joe Rogan. I'm not going to start doing 3-hour podcasts. So what we'll do, we'll move on to the final questions. But
final questions.
Sometimes I move on to the final questions, and then that takes half an hour in itself. So we're going to do these quite quick fire. Okay. So you don't need to give too many explanations. Sometimes I ask these questions and it really just needs a 1-sentence answer. And then the person will go on this big tangent about like their grandmother's cooking and whatnot. So
I won't do that.
Well, I don't care about your grandmother's cooking. Okay. No. This question was devised when we were in a strict lockdown, but we're now we can't leave Saigon, sorry. But if you could go anywhere on a bike in Saigon right now, where would you go?
I want to be in nature, so Sapa or Ninh Bình. Next.
In Saigon, everyone gets the question wrong. Everyone, this is meant to be, if you could just get out of your house, jump on a bike and go somewhere local. I've had people say like the same as you, like, oh, I'd go to Nha Trang, I'd go here, I'd go there. Sorry. Jump on a bike. Where would you go? I specifically said to you though, where would you go in Saigon? And you still said Sapa. Where would you go right now?
Where would I go right now in Saigon? I would love to go to like a rooftop bar somewhere.
You're still not getting this. The rooftop bars aren't open. Where would you go?
Right now.
If you can leave your house right this second, jump on a bike. Either on
a very constricted question. I feel like very restricted by this question.
Yeah, that's the question has been designed like that, and you're just smashing the design. Go. Where would you go?
A bad question. I don't
blame the question.
I would love to go to maybe Mia Saigon. It's
where?
Mia Saigon.
Oh, Mia Saigon. They said Mia Saigon. All right, Mia Saigon. All right. I think we might have covered this question, so you probably don't need to give much of an answer. But what has been the most challenging thing about lockdown?
I love lockdown. I told you this, and being away from my family.
Okay, that's a good one. Yeah, we've been away from ours for a long time. What's been the best thing about lockdown?
Oh, my neighbors and I got really close. We have like...
Yeah, your neighbor was Tommy Pruczynski, right?
Yeah, we got really close. And the rest of the building and I, we got really close because we wanted to get vegetable delivery. And back at the time when we were under the military martial law lockdown, they used to do only like 8 kg minimum vegetable deliveries. So went around knocking on everybody's doors and then got neighbors. It was great. And
that's cool.
It was really cool. Favorite part.
We actually nearly moved into your building a few years ago. We looked at an apartment there. We were very close. I know where you live because I know Tommy as well, obviously. All right. What in Vietnam has shocked you the most?
What in Vietnam? Oof. How much paper they use?
It's mental in it. It's just insane. Where does it all go? That's my question. Is it like a warehouse somewhere with just stacks of paper? Like, I don't know.
It's and how they have to, like, when you chop on papers, it's like you've got to spread all of it out like a fan and then chop on all the pages. It's crazy.
And then conversely, what pleasantly surprises you about Vietnam?
Vietnamese people are like very community driven, very kind, very giving, and they really take care. Like during the lockdown, I participated in a couple of like charity distributions around the neighborhood. And, we had a lot of the local district volunteers actually bring us to the foreigners and the expats and a lot of the others. So it was quite sweet to see that they were really taking care of like the local Vietnamese, but also the foreigners. It was very nice. Yeah.
Yeah. The longer I'm here, the more I'm reminded that Vietnamese people are
They're
amazing.
the best.
So, Jovel, thank you so much. It's
Thank
been
you.
amazing to have this conversation. We've talked online for quite a while now,
Yes,
and then I listened to your podcast.
Don't listen to my podcast.
I listened to your podcast for the first time last week, and it was very strange because it was actually the first time I'd heard your voice. It was kind of weird. It was like, oh, that's what she sounds like, because we'd only ever communicated by messenger, and we've never met in person yet, or hopefully we will soon. So before we move on to the question and answer session, and I just looked and we still have people here, which is amazing. I can't believe that so many people have stayed this long listening to me.
People are very polite.
They've all got the cameras off. They're all like away from the house. None of them are actually.
They're not behind the screens. They're not.
Yeah, no, not at all. I hope they are though. But before we do, tell the people watching live, tell the people that will be listening to this, the people that will watch on YouTube, where can they find your blog? Where can they follow you? Where can they know more about you? And what is next for Jovel Chan in Saigon?
Yes. So you can follow, if you're interested to read more about food and beverage and the Vietnam's growing talent within the industry and the potential, you can follow me. I'm jovelchan.com. So JOVLCHAN.com. And you can follow me on Instagram. Just type Jovel. Thank God I have like a super unique name. I'm usually the first one that shows up. I talk a lot about, the F&B industry. And of course, like Niall said, I talk a lot about mental health. And
Niall?
Neil?
Neil.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
We've never really met in person. It's fine.
I usually get away with these things when I tell people it's not my first language. I'm like, it's not my first language. I don't speak English. Okay, Neil, sorry.
Wait, what is your first language?
It's English. It's English.
I was gonna say from Singapore. It's English.
English. Singaporean English. It's very different.
It's English.
Yeah. And what's next for Vietnam's F&B industry? Is that?
Yeah, go.
A lot of Vietnam, like elevated and reimagined Vietnamese cuisine, and also a lot of really cool things coming up from the spirits and alcohol industry.
Ooh, awesome. Yeah. I'm excited about that. I do have a confession to make. I thought your name was Jovel for the longest time.
Because it's like novel, right? Because it's like novel.
Yeah. And then
I respond to it.
Then it was Tommy that told me, and he was like, I was like, Jovel, and he's like, and then I thought he said Jovel, so I was calling you Jovel for the longest time, but then in my head, I was calling you Jovel, and then you told me it was Jovel. So I made the effort to pronounce your name correctly for tonight, but it's good to see that you didn't do the same thing. But
no, but I didn't know. We don't have a lot of Singaporeans called Neil.
Now I've gone back to the gallery mode.
Yeah.
It's fucking awesome to see that. Well, Adri's still here because she has to be, because she's like right there.
My boyfriend
Zion, Annie, Connor, and Pippa. It's awesome to see you guys are still here. Thank you so much. I hope you guys enjoyed that. We're now open to a Q&A for Jovel. So guys, please ask some questions.
Oh, everybody's like, oh man, she just talked too much. We don't have questions. She's answered all the questions that we've had.
Yeah. Am I able to ask the first one, Jovel, or is it?
Of course. But you know better than anybody my life story.
Yeah, here we go for round two.
Sure.
But the one thing that it came up towards there, obviously, from the career that you've gone towards. It wasn't easy. And we chatted about it in our podcast.
Yeah.
And like a young Asian female in the Middle East.
Yeah.
But you're also, as we said, very open about mental health.
Yeah.
How have you managed to stay both, say, assertive, but also vulnerable? How do you navigate that balance?
Thanks for listening to this episode of 7 Million Bikes, a Vietnam podcast. We hope you enjoy hearing our guest stories. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe to the show and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Thank you so much to our producer, Lewis Wright, for making sure the show sounds as good as possible for you. And also a big thanks to the 7 Million Bikes community members and everyone who supports us. Don't forget, if you haven't already, you can join the community today. The link is in the description and you'll get free event tickets, free 7 Million Bikes face mask and invites to special member events. Also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and I'm still ashamed to say this, TikTok. Most of all, if you can, please donate to Saigon Children's Charity or Blue Dragon's Children Foundation's COVID appeals. Remember, we have 6 seasons of stories to share with you, so check them out if you haven't already, and we hope you can listen to future episodes too, so you can laugh, connect, and discover. Cheers! I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're like me, you may use your laptop at places where you have to use public Wi-Fi. This opens you up to digital snoopers. It's a massive problem. It can be your internet service provider, or you know who, looking at what you do online, or a cyber criminal trying to steal your bank passwords or credit card info, or even a hacker at the next table trying to steal your sensitive data. These days, it is vital that you keep your data safe. NordVPN keeps all of these snoopers away. It makes your internet activity private, protects you from accessing dangerous websites that are phishing for your data, and lets you enjoy your favorite content securely, even while away from home. And it's easy to use, even I could use it. I've actually been using NordVPN for years now here in Vietnam, and I'm excited to be an affiliate partner with them. I've used NordVPN to watch Netflix, BBC, Disney Plus with ease. And I also know that my information and data are safe from prying eyes, whoever they may be. Join now and you'll get 68% off and 3 months free when you go to my link, nordvpn.com/SMB. Just again, for those hard of hearing, nordvpn.com/SMB. The link is also in the show notes. I know nobody checks them out, but go check that out and you can get the link from wherever you are listening to this podcast. As an affiliate partner, it also means that I will get a small commission when you sign up, but at no extra cost to you. So not only will you be getting a great deal through 7 Million Bikes, you get a great VPN and you'll be supporting 7 Million Bikes podcast. Stay safe online and enjoy the shows you love. Any questions, just let me know. You know how to get in touch with me. And thanks for listening to this show. Cheers.